Thanks, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. It's interesting. Nathan and I and Chad, who's talking at noon, and Chad and Vaughn, who are talking towards the end of the day, none of us got together and coordinated this, but I think there's a theme this year, and the theme is a really Silicon Valley word. I'm from Silicon Valley. It's disruption, and it's change. And I think we are at an interesting point in IT where things are changing. The VM-centric world that came up from VMware in 2005 when I started there, you know, we're pretty good at it now, right? Do you see the size of those vSphere 6 VMs, right? And now, you know, some new technologies have come up. And so what the heck, and IT is being asked to do new things. So today I'm going to talk about, we're going to talk about some of the same words and some of the same topics that Nathan used. But my role at VMware and my message today is more about what you can do and how you can change your career and how you can have a career. I mean, hopefully we're all going to be around for a couple more decades, right, in this thing. And you've got to kind of reinvent yourself and step from stone to stone. You know, and we all want to have a job that we like, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. So IT doesn't really have a great reputation in many parts of the organization, at least most IT departments. I'm sure most of your IT departments are awesome. You know, IT puts a no in innovation, right? I may be dating myself and aging myself here, but I don't know. The bastard operator from hell, right? They're still around. And it's hard when you're IT and you're expected to, we'll talk about the expectations placed on us, you know, and the problem, you know, you've got business users there, and the problem really exists between your chair and keyboard, right? And that affects our attitude, and that affects how we do our business, and then it's kind of a vicious cycle. So, but you know, so we get yelled at a lot, right? IT gets yelled at a lot. We told we're not doing it right. We get told we're not in a business alignment. We get told we're inefficient. We get told, you know, we're going out to shadow IT. But what if IT was doing exactly what it was asked to do, right? What's the one thing that will get you fired, right? If everything goes down, right? You're being asked to keep everything running. I know we talk about innovation. I know we talk about business alignment, and we're all going to make money. But if I can't get my email, somebody is going to get talked to. And I like too. Everybody also thinks you're your boss. I'm pretty sure, yes? Yeah? So old IT is a kind of a natural reaction, I think, to what's we're doing what we're being asked to do. There's a really nice book I like that came out, it's been a couple years now, Visible Ops Handbook. Gene Kim and Kevin Baer, also involved in the DevOps movement. This is actually a really nice kind of 4-step process to take control of your IT, kind of stabilize it, reduce work in progress, and stuff like that. They actually did an interesting study of high-performing IT organizations. They looked at the backgrounds of the leaders. It turns out the most effective IT people, and this is our normal, everyday operational IT, are non-commissioned officers, so like staff sergeants and people like that, chemical engineers, and auditors, right? So what do they have in common? They all come from very disciplined backgrounds. They're all about getting the job done. Now, does that mean they can't be creative? I mean, I actually have trained as a chemist, right? And I know I can be creative, and I know other chemists can be creative. I know auditors that are creative. You know, they love their spreadsheets, but they're creative. I mean, staff sergeants certainly can curse creatively, right? I know that. So, you know, so what do? We take an organization, we put it over by facilities that reports into the CFO. We charge them with never letting anything go down, and we staff them with people from very kind of rigid training and rigid backgrounds. And what do we get? We get what we expect, right? We get IT, and that's what we're being asked to do. Now, they keep you around because you're the grown-ups, right? You're being asked to do what the rest of the organization is not willing to do, which is to have discipline and to keep things running. The sales guys are running around like chickens with their heads cut off. You know, the programmers, I'm sorry if there's some programmers here, but I wouldn't trust you to run, you know, I wouldn't trust you to run my home lab. You know, and executives, I love a lot of executives, but we all know, right? They're like, they start the parade before they know anybody is following them, right? And the challenge is now, in this time of transition, right, we now have other cheaper options. We have faster options. We have options that, you know, like cloud, like consumer grade stuff. The interesting stuff a lot of times is falling into the consumer market before we get it in the enterprise market. And it's cheaper and it's faster. So it's no wonder that the lines of business are going out and doing these shadow IT projects, right? I spent a solid year with VMware IT planning a WordPress rollout. Right? So in retrospect, that was kind of foolish and kind of expensive, but that was their SDLC process. And we had a very nice WordPress rollout, and it was very secure, and it was connected to our AD and everything. And that's what's still over on blogs.vmware.com. You know, but I probably could have rolled it out in a month with, you know, $100 at a hoster, right? And they would have even kept it up to date. So there's some challenge here. So anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit about. I'll talk a little bit about this, and then we'll get to like what you can do. This is something that I use, and I thought it would just be interesting to share. And I got it from my friend Amy Lewis, who actually is now at SolidFire. She likes the principle of yes and, this improvisational tool. Modern improv actually started in Chicago in the 50s, the Second City troupe that produced most of the people who are on Saturday Night Live and in our movies these days. And the whole concept of yes and is a collaborative technique that all improv people use. Somebody says something like, I need you to install OpenStack. And you, instead of going, well, that's pretty stupid because we don't need OpenStack, you say, yes, I acknowledge your reality. Yes, I acknowledge the premise of this skit that we're going to install OpenStack. And let's figure out the ways that we might want to go about that and why we're doing that. And you go from there. So you're acknowledging them and their existence. You're removing your ego. It's not about what you want to do. And then you add your value, right? And I don't know. I like to use also this technique, the five whys. Why do we need OpenStack? Well, because it's going to make us agile. Well, why do we need to be agile? Well, the developers, they need to be doing more continuous. We're going to release more often. Well, why do they need that? Well, you know what? And so why do you think they need OpenStack? Well, they need more desktops. Well, then you can start to get into the discussion of, well, do they need VDI? Do they need kind of plain old VDI with a shared pool desktop? Do they need desktop as a service? Do I need to implement OpenStack? But you actually get a little closer to what they're actually talking about. So there's a couple of things we can do to the situation of liquid IT and bimodal IT, right? Organizational change, that's actually kind of hard for us, right? I don't work with CEOs, I don't work with CIOs, I work with you guys and gals. How can we can make organizational change, and sometimes a lot of things, when we talk about cloud, right, and we talk about, well, that's a changing, a massive deployment change of our infrastructure. It needs to really come from the top down a lot. We talk about DevOps, right? Often that's an organizational change, right? You're trying to remove silos. You might reorg the whole department. You can't do that, at least not right now. Or most of you folks can't. Or I sure couldn't when I was working there. So let's also focus on skills change and community leverage, right? Because that's where actually you have that's where you can make a difference. And I've seen this happen over and over again, right? My job is to work with IT people, professionals. And I have seen this pattern of behavior happen over and over again, and I've seen people have an amazing shift in their careers as they do this. So there's this thing called a T-shaped expert, which is kind of what, if you go to a lot of places, they'll talk to you about. And that is, if you're a generalist, that's horizontal. The challenge with being a generalist, if you're at a small shop, you're going to have a tendency to stay at a small shop. You're not going to be trusted to take care of the big infrastructure if you stay a generalist, right? You're going to be fixing printers. There's a specialist who is deep. The challenge with specialists, right? If you really become a specialist, if you've got I like to pick on storage people, so I apologize to the storage people. But if your job is to take care of this rack, take care of this VMAX, and you've been doing it for 10 years, I don't know, have they been around for 10 years, whatever, Symmetrics or whatever, that's career limiting, right? Because you hold the apocrypha of this machine, but you don't know how the rest of the business works. So that's a challenge too. The only people that can really get away with this are DBAs. So sorry about that if you're a DBA. But so I think what you really need to do is be a pie-shaped expert, right? You need to have your generalist, you need to have your specialist, and you need to have some side interests, right? Because the things that are relevant for you, if you're a master of vSphere right now, in 10 years, that's not going to be the same job. right? You're going to be the priest of the machine then, right? You're not going to be looked at as innovative. You're going to be looked as the person being like, get out of my vCenter, I'm busy, right? So don't do that. So we're going to talk a little bit about some ways that we can step from stone to stone and become a pie-shaped expert, not a T-shaped expert. Short sidebar on business alignment. This is basically me throwing the CIOs under the bus. Look, I also read a lot of CIO magazines, and I do talk to CIOs, and they complain constantly that they are not respected by the executive team, right? You know, the CEO won't let me do what I want. They don't give me a seat at the table. They don't respect IT. I mean, they got to figure that out. Right? I cannot solve that for the CIOs, and I don't think if you're a practitioner you necessarily can solve it for your boss, except by the ways we're going to talk about. So you do need to pay attention to business alignment. I know a lot of people who have MBAs, and it really does improve your alignment and understanding of the business, but you don't have to have an MBA, but you do have to pay attention to what the heck the business is doing and why they need you, right? You don't need to, you got to get out of the language of LUNs and VMs and cores and into like, why the heck are we doing this? Okay, so we're going to talk about I'm going to talk about a few different areas that I think are often confused, but that have some handholds where you guys can get leverage. And since basically all I do all day is I talk to IT pros, I'm going to give my take on them, and hopefully maybe that will clarify some of the confusion around some of these. And it's 2015, and we're still confused about cloud. So I'm in a Facebook group, right, with a bunch of other IT folks I know. And even just last week, we got into a big argument about cloud. And I think it was either about the Walmart just announced they have a big OpenStack implementation, or I actually forget even what the topic was about. But these are really super professional enterprise architects, and we started to argue about public versus private cloud and the use case of it. And this is in 2015. And what we were ignoring was, and what we were forgetting to know is, wait a minute, the use case that these one set of people were showing about the public cloud was a completely different use case than the other ones that we were crowing about on the private side. And we're by using the word cloud for everything, including SaaS, you know, we are really confusing the issue. I don't have a better word, but you know, I think we don't get wrapped up in what it means. Start to get wrapped up into you know, how that lets you deploy, right? If cloud means everything, you are no longer the owner of your infrastructure. What cloud does mean is that you are a service broker and a service provider. I really like that concept. If you're an infrastructure owner, right, you own the rack. I own these racks, I own this data center, it's mine, I paid for it, I might let you use it, right? If I'm a service broker and a service provider, that's an externally focused role, right? Do we need some email? Maybe we need to have it on-prem. Maybe we need to have it in the cloud. You know, so are we going to use SaaS? Are we going to use public cloud? And Chad this afternoon is going to talk a lot about pets versus chickens, you know, cloud native apps versus legacy apps. And so to clarify again, there's a taxonomy here, there's different use cases, and we get confused. If somebody says, you know, they need OpenStack, do they really? And even, I mean, if you're going to use it, you know, the integrated OpenStack is actually a good choice. But do most enterprises actually need a chicken farm, you know, on premises? Most of them actually don't. So anyway, that's one thing about the challenge, though, is cloud uses a number of skills to really take advantage of that are in short demand. So I got this list from Scott Lowe from another VMUG, VMware Scott Lowe, and as he's been talking to folks, people have been telling him these are some of the skills that are needed in the cloud world today, right? A lot of them around automation. vSphere has a very interesting set of APIs. You know, OpenStack has a set of APIs. AWS has a set of APIs. The configuration management tools have a set of APIs. Things like Docker have a set of APIs. And the way you stitch them together is you use the APIs. So you do not have to become a software developer. Nobody raised their hands when Nathan asked who's a software developer. No one expects you to become a software developer. You have a different skill set than a software developer, frankly more valuable in a lot of ways. But you are expected to know some of the basics of software development. And the way to dip your foot in, right, is to start scripting, right? Start with some PowerShell. Start with some Perl or Python, right? a lazy sysadmin is a really good sysadmin, right? Because they have everything scripted. A lot of Linux is built, a lot of the cloud is built on Linux and Unix-like systems. If you're a Windows person, you should get some Linux knowledge, right? It's healthy. I say that I started off as a Unix person, actually, so I'm a little biased. But if you're a GUI person, you need to know some scripting, right? There's a lot of power there. And a lot of the cloud stuff that's going on is powered by Linux. Automation and orchestration tools, configuration management tools, Puppet, Chef, SaltStack. There's more. You know, those are some configuration management tools. There's other automation tools. There's stuff like VMware. There's stuff like Orchestrator, which is still which is amazingly awesome. You know, there's PowerShell. There's a lot of automation and orchestration tools which will make you more powerful. And finally, public cloud services. You know, you should probably try them. I don't know. So AWS started in 2006. How many people have spun something up on AWS? Oh, well, okay, thank God, I guess. That's 40% of you. So 60% of you have never spun anything up on AWS. A child can spin things up on AWS. I can spin things up on AWS, and the last time they gave me the root password was I think 1996. My sysadmin was going away for the weekend. He gave me a piece of paper with the root password on it. He said, if you use this, I'm going to fire you. I can spin up something on AWS. It's really not that hard. My wife all of her WordPress assets are up on S3. Give it a try. It's not that bad. Give it a kick. Now, the stuff we're going to talk about today, sometimes people get very heated about, and they get very passionate about, and they get very religious about. But none of this stuff is a silver bullet, right? The theme of today's talk should not only be disruption and bimodal IT, but it should also be plurality, right? It's either or. There are many ways to solve the same problems, and your data center is not going to look monolithic. For a while, I thought we were going to get to this monolithic data center where all of our racks were the same. We have just some big pool of resources, magic pool of resources, and I wasn't going to tune any stack for anything. We were just going to use the same stack for everything, and that didn't, unfortunately, turn out that way. So your data center is going to be very heterogeneous, and your services you offer are going to be very heterogeneous. Docker. Let's talk about Docker. That's the hot thing in Silicon Valley right now. I talk to a lot of startups. They look at me funny when I talk about VMware, and then they start talking about Docker and the integration tools that they're using. Just a quick primer. A container sits on top of an OS instead of in the top diagram is the hypervisor sitting on the hardware. Virtual machines are running inside the hypervisor. They're virtual, they're virtual physical machines. They have operating systems in front of them, and then containers can run inside that operating system, or you can run the apps like we do now. We run the apps inside the operating system. Most container, if you're not using a hypervisor, you have an operating system, a Linux operating system for most of these containers. Most of them, and there are a few different flavors, right? And they run operating system level containers, just like a chroot. Basically, they're basically a namespace inside and a process space inside the operating system, and you run the apps in there. The difference, the best explanation of the difference of why all of a sudden are we hearing about Docker all the time. I actually stole from a friend of mine, Nick Weaver, who's now at Intel, and he was at VMware and built a lot of VMware's one cloud infrastructure. The job to be done for VMs, for virtual machines, was back in 2002, 3, 4, 5, we had really low utilization. We had a lot of Windows machines. They were 5% utilized, 10% utilized. The hardware had gotten big faster than the apps had gotten fat, right? So we had all these machines laying around, we weren't using them. So the use case for the first 10 years of VMware, right, was we went in and did server consolidation, right? And it was amazing. The ROI was instant. It was a really fun 10 years because we were saving a lot of people money, and that was the job to be done. We had all these apps. A lot of them were Windows apps. They weren't really using the hardware they were sitting on. Now we have these cloud native apps. A couple of things are going on. Like this bimodal IT Nathan was talking about, they're releasing faster, right? They're going from, I was just reading an article 2 days ago about how Microsoft is changing Visual Studio from being a yearly or bi-yearly release cycle to a cloud-based version that gets updated every week, right? So if you're doing continuous integration, you're doing deployment, you need a completely different scale of compilation to compile and deploy your code. than we used to. So we would spin up a VM, and the VM lasted a long time, right? You'd spin up a VM, you might use configuration management tool. 10 years ago, you might just do it by hand. You had some scripts and you had a template. Here's your VM. You know, it's gonna last for a couple years before Docker and containers, the whole value proposition is that they are relatively immutable and that they are transient and that you do never ever F with them once you build them, right? You build them, and if you need a new version, you rip them down and you build a new one. And you do that because it has some copy on write functionality in the file system, like this fat instant clone stuff that VMware is doing now. So we're going to get some of the same benefits in VMs. Docker has some other benefits as well, and we'll talk about them in a sec. But so I think Docker is worth paying attention to as an operator, right? And here are some of the reasons why. These are some quotes actually from 3 or 4 months ago on Hacker News. And basically the question was, why do you use Docker? How do you use Docker? Why is this getting such a lot of attention? So one of the, trivial repeatability, easily rebuildable. And then the question, of course, was, why can't you just use Puppet or Chef, or why can't you just use a template? And the answer, in theory, you can. In practice, it turns out to be more complicated. One, Docker files are very composable. Very composable, they have a Docker. There's a Docker hub. You can download you can start with base images. You can then layer stuff on top of it, and then if you need to change one of the layers, it happens very quickly. If you do a VM, if you do a VM with configuration management in Puppet and Chef, and actually, does anybody here work at Puppet or Chef? Because okay, so in Sydney, I gave this talk, and I started saying what some of the Docker people were saying about Puppet and Chef, and we had some words afterwards. Because there is this kind of divide of the people who are kind of hardcore Docker users. They're like, well, I love Puppet and Chef, and SaltStack and Ansible, and there's new ones. The guy that does Vagrant now does Terraform, which is kind of a cloud cluster configuration management tool. But my temptation is, right, I go through I spin up my VM, Docker, I use my Puppet, and it's in a known state, pretty much, unless I remove some packages, in which case I still have to clean them up. And then my temptation, though, is to SSH in, right? My temptation is to log in and fix something when it's broken. And so that's kind of the cultural divide, and maybe the discussion that's going on here is like the people, the hardcore Docker users, just want to treat a VM as an immutable object, and they want to treat it like, let's just kill it and build a new one. So I think this is all going to come together. If you want to learn more about Docker, I'm going to plug some friends at Pluralsight. Pluralsight's an interesting training company. It's just video training, right? It's not like you can get from VMware. But it's cheap. It's like $39 a month US. I'm not sure what it is here. But there's a Docker Fundamentals and a Docker Deep Dive that just came out. Give that a try if you're a Pluralsight subscriber. The Docker people, there's really not one place to get information about Docker and about containers in general. I mean, there are some of the dev sites like InfoQ and things like that. But frankly, there's the mailing list they use. There's a really good Docker mailing list from Docker. And these developers, they all use GitHub as a forum. So I don't quite understand it, but that's what the kids are doing these days. So check them out on GitHub. There's actually a lot of good discussion over there. If you've ever, edited a VMX file, you can make a Docker file. I didn't grab the right picture here because I wanted actually a better Docker file to show you. But if you've set Docker file is very compositional. It's very easy to get started. Don't get intimidated. Now, these things are going to be used in tandem, right? I'm not sure still if Docker is just a crappy VM at the moment, and we're never, and it's kind of a blip in the market, or if we're all going to be using containers in a couple years, and we'll look at VMs as just kind of slow, crappy containers. So I'm not sure which, but I mean, it is something worth putting on your radar if this is interesting to you. So let's talk about DevOps for a minute. The challenge with DevOps is it was explicitly invented by its inventors as not having a definition. If you talk to some of the guys that originally coined it and came up with the first DevOps days, they're actually unhappy with the current state of DevOps, because DevOps people have a tendency to talk a lot about tools. I mean, we talked about the code tool here today, and you have a tendency to talk about Puppet and Chef and things like that. And people have titles, DevOps engineer. I just did a quick Google for DevOps Melbourne, and I got a couple DevOps engineers that are on that are open right now. And if you talk to the people that originally kind of invented this concept, I think it was in part from previous not fads, but movements in like Agile and Scrum, where they had a bunch of rigid rules. Not everybody followed them, like not many people do pair programming, but they had really these are the 10 things you need to do this, right? And they were kind of rigid about it. And in some ways, I think DevOps was a reaction to it, which has now made it a little bit hard to pin down, right? You kind of have to, I don't know, you can't really nail it to the wall. I mean, look at this bullet point here. It's about empathy, right? It's about culture, it's about org charts, it's about inclusivity, it's about aligning incentives across the organization, removing information hiding, about making clear responsibilities. Well, I don't even understand. I wrote that and I don't understand what it means, right? For your organization, right? It's really about doing IT right. It's really about functioning organizations, and it's really, I think it's an excuse for like-minded people to come together and say, look, this old way, this old silo thing where the storage guys hate the network guys, hate the virtualization guys, hate the programmers, is not serving us anymore. So let's get together and try to talk about what's going on. I mean, that's in theory. In practice, there's a lot of talk about, Puppet and Chef and things like that. But it really does mean more about that. It really does mean more about that. And it is an operational tool. A phrase that I wrote at the end I really like. It clarified some things for me a couple of weeks ago. This actually comes from a guy he was at an advertising agency. He was then at the British Government Digital Services. Now he's in the US at this thing called Code for America. A guy called Dan Hahn. Dan Hahn said, when he was at the agency, they would have these teams, like people would pay them a lot of money to come in and be creative, right? And they called them multidisciplinary teams, because they would have an account executive, they would have account executive, they would have a designer, they would have a copy editor, they would have a programmer, they would have a social media person, right? They'd all come together and they would all work together, and they would deliver something that a company could not execute on their own. And he tried this turns out that multidisciplinary teams kind of confuse people. They weren't kind of getting it. So they came up with this term, end-to-end service delivery teams, which I really like. It means that we're a team, we're delivering a service, not a product, I'm not letting you use my infrastructure. I'm delivering a service, and we're responsible for it end-to-end, right? It's about the end user experience, whether that end user is, Phil in accounting or, Mary the customer, right? So, it's hard to say, well, here's how to get, here's a funny thing, and then I think I already told you how to get started. Here's how to get started, but in this squishy thing. This I stole from Twitter, and I couldn't find it, so I recreated it. Everything comes into our industry in kind of different ways. You acknowledge the old way doesn't work. Some smart people go out and fix things and make things better, invent something new. They're kind of the lead sled dogs, right? Everybody else says, oh, wow, that looks really interesting. Let's try to codify that into best practices, right? We do that in IT all the time, although some people don't like the word best practices, because best practices, lo and behold, depend on the context in which they're implemented in, right? And so we see that with a lot of VMware recommendations too, right? Then you establish these processes, but if you're outside of the context in which you invented this stuff, a rigid process fails, and of course then you acknowledge that way doesn't work, and you start to reinvent yourself. So I think DevOps is right about here. We're codifying it into best processes. Am I stopping now, or do I have half an hour? 5 minutes? Dude, I thought I had an hour. You guys can decide. I was going to tell you about the three DevOps certifications. One is from AWS, and it is DevOps engineer. It looks a lot like an architect. It's pretty AWS-y, and then it has some DevOps-y stuff in it. A new for-profit DevOps Institute just started, and a lot of people are kind of upset about that. So there is a third one. You go to DevOpsGuild.com, and you can download a certificate from DevOps and write your name in it, and you'll be DevOps certified. And just to make fun of the ITIL people, the ITIL, we're really at a broken place here with ITIL. Look at continuous integration, look at configuration management stuff. The Phoenix Project is a book I really like. There's a Melbourne DevOps meetup. Go ahead and go out there. This is what we're trying to solve. Right? This is the reality of a lot of us. Let's talk about community for just a sec. I work with vendors, and vendors need geeks, right? Vendors need geeks now because the old ways of marketing aren't working, right? They cannot do more Google ads. They cannot send out more emails. They cannot do more webinars. I mean, that's why the vendors are here, right? That's why all these people are here. This is the best way to talk to you, right? And not send you 1,000 emails in your inbox. So I work with vendors now to facilitate their conversations with geeks, to validate products, to make marketing messages, to explain to their peers. That's what I did with the vExpert program. The studies these days show that all the studies, when a customer is making a decision, they make 50 to 70%, sometimes people say 90% of their decision before they ever talk to the vendor, right? That's what you guys do. You Google it, you talk to people. So that terrifies vendors, right? Because by the time you talk to them, you've already made a decision that you're pretty interested in them and not the other guy, right? That makes the other guy very nervous. So how do they get to you? They use you, right? They use geeks. You have a lot of power. And I've really seen this work over and over again. Because of open source, cloud, SaaS, social media, time to value is much faster. Try before you buy is possible. Knowledge sharing is much more relevant. Check out this book, The New Kingmakers, by Stephen O'Grady from RedMonk. He's really talking about developers, but he's really talking about all of technologies, right? 10, 20 years ago, you might not know if a project is going to work. The time to value could be like $1 million in consulting and 6 months or a year. If you buy most software without actually getting to touch it, or getting to know more about it through blogs or through reviews or whatever, or classes or hands-on labs, you're kind of foolish, right? And so the CIO and the buyer, the person that writes the check, depends on you to vet that, right? They depend on you to help them make that decision. So you have a lot of power, more power than in the old days. Let's talk about the power of community, and then we'll let it go. You guys are Voltron. You come together, you bring your lions together to be able to save the universe. The V Brown bag, of which at least Alistair, are you the only V Brown bagger here at the moment? So Alistair Cook, who will be has a couple sessions today, is one of the V Brown bag community members. It's a weekly webinar. It's been going on for years. It has been it started off as a certification kind of brown bag seminar. It's in 3 time zones. Definitely check it out. And they also do live stuff. They'll be at the OpenStack Summit. They're at VMworld. They did a survey of their community members, and they asked, you're part of community, you're participating in stuff like VMUGs, what benefits have you received? And it's a little bit of an odd group, right? Because it looks like 5% of the people in that survey wrote a book, which is kind of unusual. But 70% of people, 60-70%, say that this helped my job, this helped me do my job. And also this helped me network and make great friends. So there is a large propensity to actually enjoy what you're doing. I hope you enjoyed today. The other thing is, it's not about the money, but it's about the money, right? So let's look at that. People who participated in community, and this is over the whole survey, right? Half of them didn't get a raise, but half of them did get a raise, right? So over half of them, a little under half of them got a raise. And of the people that switched jobs, they all got a raise when they switched jobs. If you are a manager in the room, I do have to say I am sorry that a lot of people who get involved in communities have a tendency to change jobs. Either they get a promotion because they're ready for more responsibility, or they have a new interest, or they decide that this is not working out, right? This is an old IT spot and there's more opportunity for me elsewhere. So, treat your people that are part of community well, right? And that will stay. You should get that benefit of all the work they're doing. I do Tech Reckoning. I also have a weekly newsletter. Check it out. I work on the Geek Whisperers podcast. We talk about IT careers, social media marketing, how vendors work with bloggers, things like that. Also check it out. The mailing list is kind of funny. It doesn't come out every week, but we talk about stuff. We'll talk about Walmart and that SSL thing that's going on right now. And I don't know what, this week we'll talk about some stuff like that. Look, the challenge, like I said, how do you as a person, change things. I really believe that this industry can be transformed by individuals, right? It does not have to come from the CIO. It does not have to come from Gartner. It does not have to come even from the CIO, from anybody. We can change the world. So, I think the best way to be a pie-shaped expert, right, is side projects, right? Start a side project, get involved with stuff, go to a user group, try a new tool, blog about it. You'll learn a lot. Start a brown bag for your fellow teammates, right? That's the way you start. It's an agile method, right? You start side projects, and not all of them will work, right? You'll abandon some. You'll write a blog for a couple weeks, and then it'll be like, nah, I'm not getting that much out of it. But the faster you iterate, and the more that the more likely you are to get immediate feedback. There's kind of a brain thing there. So a couple of Jedi mind tricks. The middle one, do things that charge you up, right? If you do a blog post, you'll get a few readers, and then the next time you do a blog post, if you're current at it, if you're consistent at it, you'll get a few more and a few more. All of our blogs started that way, whether it was 2005 or now, and that gives you a little endorphin rush. You're like, yeah, man, 10 people read my blog today, and pretty soon it's like 100 people read my blog today. And so that endorphin rush is what keeps you going. And actually, that was a difficulty with some of our corporate blogs because we didn't report back to the authors, or if you're doing a corporate blog for work, right? We didn't report back to the authors. They're like daily and monthly traffic. And so it was kind of like homework. Like if you don't get that, it's kind of like homework. Oh, I've got to write an essay today. I've got to write 500 words on, how to automate something. So rapid deployment. I really would like to see people shift from an operator mindset to a creator mindset. I think IT has a problem in that we think we're operators. We think we're not creative. We think we don't create things. I just get trained on the machine, and I know how to run it. And when the light turns red, I turn the dial down. Right? That's all I know how to do. That's what I was trained to do. That's what my job is. But really, we create things. And it's kind of like saying, we put together huge enterprise architectures. We put together data centers. There's a reason when somebody takes a VCDX, gets a VCDX certification, they do a defense, and those proposals are hundreds of pages, right? And you're not doing a VCDX presentation. But the reason it's hundreds of pages is there are millions of ways of hooking these things together, right? Even if it's as simple as a storage array and some servers and a switch, right? There's a million ways to do it. And you talk to the vendors, right? They'll all tell you their way. You are creators. It's like an engineer saying, I don't really create things. I just tell people how to put pieces of steel together to make bridges, but I don't really create things, right? You are creative, and I think the more that you recognize that within yourself, the better off we all are. Anyway, and finally, if you listen to people, it makes you seem smarter. So that's my other trick. People actually think you're smarter if you listen to them and then go, yes, 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 even though in the side of your head you know that they're kind of still idiots. Anyway. This is a quote from Gandhi about if we could change ourselves, we can change the world. Unfortunately, this does not fit on a bumper sticker, and so most of the time you see this, which is not Gandhi, but be the change you wish to see in the world, and I think I'll leave it. Thanks. And stick around for Chad and Vaughn. They are amazing speakers. If you've never seen them, stick around. They're amazing.